Hello and welcome to the Peace is an Action Verb podcast. I'm here with Michael Chendorain, who I know as Chendo, who we went to graduate school way back in the day together in Riverside, California in the mid 1990s and studied soil science. And we were a part of a group of graduate students that did a lot of backpacking and hiking and just generally
Yeah.
hanging out and enjoying each other's company in Riverside. So, Mike, that's my introduction to you. I'd like to invite you to introduce yourself.
Yep. So that's right. So my name's Mike Chendorain, and most people call me Chendo these days. And yeah, I moved from Virginia to go to graduate school in University of California, Riverside, and that's where we met. And then after that, I went to UC Berkeley, and I stayed there for a couple of years. And then I didn't want to leave the San Francisco Bay Area, so I stayed there for another like 15 years. And then I met a very special person, and then we moved to London. I thought I was going to live in London for 2 years and then go back to California, but then after almost 10 years, we moved to Singapore, and now we live in Singapore and we have two kids. And
Wow,
so, yeah,
congratulations. So, like, you just caught us up on a whole chapter of adulting.
yeah,
It's like we
yeah,
knew each other in our early 20s. And also, my husband Farhad says hello over in the other
yes.
room.
So
So,
Farhad and I were really close in graduate school, and I've lost touch with you guys. And I actually worked for his brother at UC Berkeley. He was my professor boss
oh gosh, I
there,
didn't
Masood.
realize that. So, Masood says hello too.
Okay, yeah, I haven't
Yeah.
talked to Masood in a very long time,
Well, he has two grown children now.
I'm
So,
sure.
yeah.
They were tiny when well, not even that tiny when that was in, like you said, the late 90s at that point.
Yeah. Yeah. So Mike, I have this list of piece verbs that I want to just touch on briefly with you here. And, so you and I started out in graduate school studying science, but I remember seeing a couple years ago that you're still publishing in science. So can you tell us a little bit about how your career has moved and what you
Yeah.
work on these days?
So I really enjoyed UC Riverside and the graduate experience I had there. It was phenomenal for me, and it was really a lightning rod to excite me about the type of science that I was interested in, which was basically how fluids move in the ground. And so from there, I went to UC Berkeley, and that's when I worked for Masood. And after that, I worked for another former UC Berkeley student, and his interest was in air movement through soil and steam movement through soil. And so we worked on a lot of environmental engineering projects, helping the Air Force clean up all their old Air Force bases that were contaminated as they tried to uh, not have Air Force bases. And then I was just really interested in a lot of different ways that you can deal with contamination and how things move and how you can harness bacteria. And so I did a lot of that all up and down the coast of California. And then I started to have to deal with lawyers quite a bit. And because I started having to deal with lawsuits where one person contaminated something, but they didn't want to pay or they were blaming somebody else. And uh, lawyers were really interesting because they try to game the system for their clients a little bit because that's what they're being paid to do. So you can get into some very intense conversations about what they believe and what you believe because as you'll know, like the soil, we get one or two holes in the ground and the rest is a guesswork, right? So there's a lot of
So
interpretation
there's a lot of
out there.
forensics that you're doing basically. I mean, if you're looking underground, right? But
Yeah,
there's also just what might a chemical have been when it was first leaked or
yeah,
deposited? How does it change over time? You were talking about
yeah,
microbes and what they might do, the microbes that live there in that soil, how they might change that chemical. And then so being able to attribute who's now responsible for cleaning it up is it's scientifically tricky and then now legally getting pushed on is what I'm hearing you say.
yeah, yeah. And so, I got an opportunity my wife and I, we wanted to move to London, and so there was an engineering sort of mid to large size engineering company that needed a groundwater person, and so we moved to London, and I stopped doing contaminated land type work for a little while. I mean, I was always helping out on the side with teams in the UK and in the US, but I was focusing then more on how to manage groundwater for big construction projects. And also one of the things that was really interesting is I developed our geothermal engineering group. So my sort of mentor at this company, Arup is the company, and my mentor was like, "Oh, we've done this and this," and then I really got excited about it, and so we've done, we do a lot in the world of geothermal engineering. We do like shallow geothermal and deep geothermal. So I was flying to Indonesia quite a bit to work with the Indonesian government, and I've worked on some of the biggest power plants in the Philippines as well, and the first UK geothermal power plant. And one of the things we have to do a lot is deal with seismic issues. Everybody knows
Yeah.
about fracking and how fracking can cause earthquakes, but deep geothermal can cause earthquakes too. And so that's how I got to publish in Science a few years back, was through the work we did in a project in Finland where we had to really evaluate seismic impacts from stimulating deep wells. These were like 6.5 kilometer deep wells.
Wow. So you're no longer talking just about soil. So it sounds like your team is now including lots of different scientists of different types, geologists,
Yes. Yeah.
engineers. Who
Yeah.
else is who else is involved in that kind of
I,
exploration?
yeah, I call myself a nerd herder at this point
Oh,
because
okay.
I just have to find somebody who's smart to solve a problem that we have in front of us. So it could be somebody who does computational fluid dynamics. We worked on one of the largest oil spills on land in North American history in Michigan,
Wow.
and we had to evaluate the impact of rainfall on the release of the oil from the pipeline and how rainfall may have contributed to the spreading of the oil spill. So we
Right.
had to use a computational fluid dynamicist to help do that modeling.
So it's like you're using your own, and I wanted to actually talk to you a little bit about science. You're using your own basics understanding of what science is, how science works, to then figure out, okay, how do I stretch my team to the questions that we now need to evaluate using science? And I think a lot of the world gets moved and decided upon by science, but I don't think a lot of people really actually know what it is. If you can distill it down for us, what is the scientific method? Like how do you approach a problem or a situation in the world and then apply science to it? What does that mean?
Yeah, okay, that's a really interesting question. So I think one of the things that strikes me about science is lines of evidence. So there's never usually one way to figure something out. You have to sort of look at it from a bunch of different angles,
Huh.
and those different angles should all be moving towards a specific idea or conclusion about it. And if they're creating different streams of understanding, then you got to look at it at a few more angles until you're sort of getting to the best fit. And there's never going to be a perfect fit, especially when you're working underground.
Yeah.
I mean, the joke we usually make, because I work with a lot of structural engineers, is, structural engineering is easy. All you have to do is worry about the wind.
It's just one thing, right? It's one
Yeah,
variable. Just
yeah,
like so
yeah,
you're so I it's really interesting for me to hear you answer that question because I think back to like how my high school biology teacher would have answered the same question I just posed to you and would have said something along the lines of you have a question and you want to answer that question yes or no. However, you now need to figure out all the different influences on that answer, and you need to eliminate and control as many of them as possible so that you know how many influences there are in the answer to your question. And so I'm hearing you speak as a groundwater scientist or as a soil scientist because you're talking so spatially. You're like, okay, we have to come at it from this angle, from that angle. And it's this, I get this really 365-degree sensation in your answer. And so I'm wondering if you had backed yourself up to like halfway through college, or like you started your science career before you arrived in graduate school.
Yeah.
Has that experience shifted for you as you've moved through your different studies and into your professional life as a scientist?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I started my science career probably when I was in second grade. I had a science teacher that really excited me about science, and he posed this question about how light travels.
Ah,
Is it waves or is it particles? Is it photons or waves? And I just thought it was a really cool thing that you could look at it and it could be both, or it could be either one, depending on how you ask the question, you
yeah.
know? So to me, the question is more important than the answer many times because if and I have to stress this because I deal with a lot of people that are either non-technical or they're so technical that they live in a vacuum of their sort of world.
It's
Their
easy to
little
be like that, right? Because you have to study a lot.
Yeah, yeah, and it's important that we want these nerds to be really good at one thing and be very excited about that one thing,
Yeah.
So I'll just turn these guys over and just say, just go think about it for a while.
Yeah.
But what I try to stress to them is like, what is this person asking you? You have to really think about their question. And then you have to think about first of all, what's the answer to that question? And knowing that they don't really understand this, and this is why they came to you in the first place to ask you this question, you have to realize they probably didn't ask you the right question in the first place
Oh,
because they don't know
wow.
what to ask. So now
Right.
you have to think about they asked this question, why did they ask that question? And what's their goal? What are they really trying to get to? And then you have to tell them the answer to their question, but then you also have to tell them what they actually need to know.
Uh-huh.
And you have to do it in 3 sentences,
Oh my
because
gosh.
these folks will write if you leave them alone, they'll write a lot.
And
And
it's interesting, right? Because what you're getting at right now is the art of communication, or communication as
yeah,
a piece verb, even. And
yeah,
so, when we're coming through school in different disciplines, we're taught different styles of writing. And so if you're taught to write a scientific journal, you were just talking about being published, right? You have a
yeah,
certain way you set it up. You write your abstract last. That's what someone will see first, but you lay
yeah,
out, here's how I set it all up, and this is all the information I gathered, and then the conclusion is somewhere way down at the end, and you're saying, wait a second, let's just deconstruct all of this. And it's like, I imagine a little bit like speaking a foreign language, to speak to somebody who's a non-scientist asking you for help, and yet I'm also hearing that you're a facilitator.
oh yeah. I that's all I do now is, I mean, I think one of the things I've learned probably in my definitely in my adult life is that communication is the most important thing that we do as people,
Yeah.
and that everything that we do is a success only because of communication and our ability to communicate with each other and share information to people that are looking at it from different ways.
And Shendo, I what that brings me back to is two verbs here on this list. I started with learn with your mind. That was the piece verb I was thinking of when I started asking you about science. You're learning with your mind with that. But there was a spark that lit up for you, and you were what, 7 or 8? How old are we when we're
Yeah, I
in
was
second
little. I
grade?
was pretty little when I got interested in science.
So there was some kind of joy that lit up for you, and a teacher that you remember as being the person that sparked that for you. So
Yeah.
there's a learning with your heart that's also happening here. And then to say that you're coming to a realization that communication is the key to it all is like even more learning with the heart, because that's about empathy and about connecting with people and about solving problems together. So lots of learning, lots of learning that you're bringing to that.
Yeah, I saw it yesterday. I work on a project in Indonesia for the Jakarta Metro, and we've got people from Indonesia. We've got me. I'm American. We've got Japanese people on the project. We've got people from Malaysia, people from all throughout the planet, really. There's British people, and I had something I wanted to get done, and it didn't get communicated properly. And so the client didn't understand what I was trying to say, and they're not going to do it that way. You don't win every battle, uh, but I mean, I
But you
know from the physics of it, I'm like, well, okay, but well, I'm gonna promise you this is not the last time we'll be talking about it, unfortunately, because it will come back
and
later
that
on.
and that's so interesting too, because you're now talking about like you're living this international reality, and so now not only are you having to communicate between science and non-science, or people that are trying to build something or solve a problem, but they need to come to you to this unknown world that you inhabit. But you're now talking about cultural differences too.
Oh
Language,
yeah.
uh, you know, even just manners of holding a conversation and all of that. So wow, more power to you. That's
Yeah, Indonesians, when you talk to somebody who's Indonesian of that you need to show respect for, you have to start with Pak for a man and Ibu for a woman. I
yeah,
had to learn that. I mean, my
yeah,
wife, her parents are Indonesian, so I should have known that already, and I've worked in Indonesia, but I don't do it every day. So now that I live here, I have to get up to speed with that. And then we have Mr. Suzuki from Japan, and you have to call him Suzuki-san, and so
right, right.
uh,
There's lots there.
there's lots there. And if you don't set the tone correctly culturally, which we don't have that in our culture. Americans have a very direct way of communicating to each other that
Right,
puts everybody on the same page in general. Like we
right.
don't really show that much respect to different people. We might call somebody a doctor,
Mm,
because we need that person to save our life, so it's
sure, sure.
it's a slightly different situation,
It's a little bit
and
self-serving in that sense, huh?
yeah, but
But
other than that, we're very on the same page with each other.
and I actually took an online training that was put out by the Peace Corps because I was reporting to somebody. This was early on in my profession, where they were a non-direct communicator, and it was driving me nuts because they would hint at things and they would be so frustrated with me that I didn't understand and I missed the cues, right? So this person was first generation Chinese, and
Hmm.
so what it ended up learning was that in cultures that are more ancient, where people haven't come together in a melting pot like we have primarily in our American culture, that you don't have to say a lot because all you have to do is serve the tea cold, or like there's little nonverbal cues that could be brought in to communicate something, or less direct ways to communicate something so that it can be softer. And Americans, because we're coming from all these different countries, languages, traditions, have had to be direct because there would be too much confusion otherwise.
Yeah,
So that
yeah,
was a real
probably.
revelation for
Probably right.
me. I don't know, somewhere around 2006.
Yeah, yeah, and I work with a lot of different I work. I don't work a lot in South America. It's probably the only part of the world where I don't have
Oh, no
active
kidding.
projects. So there's
Yeah.
it's a lot of that in some respects people are forgiving when you come from a culture that's outside of their culture, you know.
Yeah.
Uh, but also, if you want to be more effective, you really have to, it comes back to communication. You have to be able to communicate in a way that they are listening.
Right. Wow, that's so. I'm wondering if that's a good segue into music. Although I do also want to ask you about London, and also about India. Um, so to communicate. So how long have you been playing music? And I'm seeing different instruments behind you. So there's more than one instrument that you play. And how long has that been a part of your life?
So I started playing the cello when I was in fifth grade.
Okay.
And then, yeah, I played the cello through college. And then, I didn't want to be the nerdy cello player. So I played in rock bands. And then Uh, I played guitar and bass, and then I moved to California, and then I got interested in electronic music as well. So I started messing around with producing music, and then I had sort of a midlife crisis, or hopefully early life crisis,
Uh-huh.
and I sold everything, and I put everything that I had left in a backpack, and then I got a one-way ticket to Bangkok, and
Wow.
then I traveled around Thailand for like 3 months until my visa ran out, and then I flew to India. I got a 6 month visa, and then I traveled in India. Places like Thailand and India, they have these famous areas for like electronic music festivals. So I went and checked those places out. And then I did, India's, I don't know how much, if you've been to India, have spent any time there, but it's just it's so rich with just experiences that are you can have there. So, the electronic music festival, it's in Goa, it's a really famous area. It's a
Yeah.
beach area as well. And it was sort of the beginning of the monsoon season. It was really not that exciting or interesting. And then I went to a place called Hampi, which is like in the desert, and it's like all these temples, and it's just incredible. And then I went to this place that a friend had recommended I check out. It was like a meditation resort is what they called it,
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
so I knew nothing about this place, and I went there, and it was really interesting. It was really helpful for me. It was really good for me sort of to reconnect with myself. And they had a band, and the bass player was terrible. And so I went up, I asked somebody, I was like, who is the music director? And they said, oh, it's that guy. Who's the bass player? And I thought, oh, if he's the music director and he's not very good playing bass, it means they don't have a bass player. So he just has to suck it up and play the bass because there's nobody else to do it. So I
Yeah.
went up to him. I said, hey, do you need any help in your band? He's like, we need a bass player. And so I was like, I play bass. He's like, you start tomorrow.
That is
And
so amazing.
yeah, I got really lucky, and it was an amazing experience. We played to people meditating every night. Once a week, you were responsible for writing the music for the evening.
Oh,
And the
wow.
way it worked is you would show up at 2 o'clock. We'd rehearse for a couple hours. We'd have a chord progression, a drum beat idea, and then everybody would contribute how they wanted to approach that structure. And then when we played, we would start off, everybody's just sitting and meditating in the space. And the guru for this place, he's really famous or infamous, depending on how you look at it. They had a Netflix documentary about him. So it was the Osho Ashram in Pune.
Mm-hmm.
And so he was very into catharsis because he thought if you had a very cathartic experience, it would sort of tire your brain thought waves out so you could actually meditate a little bit more efficiently. And so we would get people dancing, and then we would just keep ramping up the tempo until somebody in the band screwed up, and then we'd do like a drum roll, and everybody would yell Osho, and then we'd do the thing again. And through the course of that, I asked them, I was like, what do you guys have that's like an Indian cello? And they're like, well, we have this or we have this. And so I started studying Indian classical music. And so I play a thing called a dilruba, which is basically like a cello in Indian. It's an Indian cello. It has frets. So,
Wow.
a cello is an unfretted instrument. So you have to really pay attention to
Yeah.
where your finger goes to stay in tune. But this one, it's more like a guitar because it has fret. So it was really easy for me to pick up.
Wow. So let me just slow you down a little bit here. So you, like so many of us that have these crisis moments, right? You're like, I am starting over and I don't even know what that means. And you buy a one-way
No
ticket.
idea. Yeah.
One-way
Yeah.
ticket to, had you been to Thailand before?
No, no.
So we've, I don't know, we really have enjoyed Thailand over the years. I think we've been there 6 times. But I remember the first time was like, wow, this is a really different place, and like the vibrancy
Yeah.
of the nightlife that just hits you as soon as you arrive. Like, and there's food everywhere, and there's people everywhere, and there's just like palm trees and water and
Yeah. It's really intense. And probably India's like 100 more times when you first arrive to India.
wow, yeah, yeah, and so the other thing I that strikes me about Thailand is the peaceful sensation that I feel there. And so like
Yeah.
even sitting in the middle of like downtown shopping center Bangkok, there's somehow this pervading sense of peace. And so did you find that as you were going around the country? Did you have a
Yeah.
sensation
I
of
think that
peace?
I think people have a more gentle energy than they do in the US. I mean, I remember I grew up in Washington, D.C. suburbs, and I couldn't get away from that place fast enough. And I remember moving to California and thinking, oh, it's very relaxed here. It's
Yeah,
very calm and people are very respectful. And I remember coming back from India and Thailand to Oakland, and I was
yeah.
like, wow, people are really rough here.
Wow.
So
Yeah, yeah.
it's all the sort of scale of the perspective of where you're coming from. And yeah, I mean, people are just incredibly gentle in Thailand. And they, I think one of the jokes I remember is like, Thai people have like 10 different ways to smile at you, and some of those smiles, they're very angry at you.
Wow. And so like, and the funny thing is that you're a southerner, right? And so, us West Coasters would might even say that about people from Virginia. It's like, that they're being polite and nice, but they may not actually be feeling like that. So it's just amazing how
Oh yeah,
there's so
absolutely.
many gradations of that, right?
Yeah.
Of politeness, kindness, gentleness. So you're in Thailand and then you're in India and then you're kind of adventuring your way and then paying attention, which is another piece verb, just paying attention to opportunities and then following through. So you're putting yourself out there, and then you find this amazing gig. And so now you're in this situation where you're playing for people who are meditating. And the catharsis I think you're talking about is a musical experience, right? Where it's like a dance and music and
Yeah, he
like
tied up
you're
music very well in his sort of pop psychology sort of practice. And music was a big part of it because it really helped people to sort of generate energy and go through their catharsis. So some music was intense, some of it was really gentle, it just really depended on the type of meditation.
And so, my sense is that music itself is a type of meditation, right? And so,
Yeah.
you're taking yourself into a different place in your brain and you're feeling those waves and you're feeling that energy and you're moving that energy through yourself, with the instrument. And like, I dabble at guitar, or let me just say I used to. And whenever I
Yeah, I
pull,
remember you played acoustic guitar when we were in
yeah,
graduate school.
and when I pull it out, I smell it and I feel like, oh, this is my old friend, the smell of the wood, and then the feeling on your belly when when this instrument is vibrating on your belly. There's just something so visceral and embodied about playing a musical instrument.
Yeah, the cello is very much like that as well. I mean,
I'm
people really
sure.
connect with the cello, and I've done a lot in meditation sort of stuff with the cello, and it has a really has a really profound. I mean, I was really lucky. I didn't like go in looking to play the cello. I wanted to play the bass. But when you're a little kid and music teacher who was, you know, he was a huge mentor and part of my life growing up. He was my music teacher from fifth grade all the way till when I graduated from high school. He
No
was always the
joke.
music. Yeah, they have a road named after him in my hometown now because he was such an important figure for so many people, and he provided like, public school system music 5 days a week for people who wanted it. It wasn't like extra
Wow.
cost or anything. I mean, you had to pay for
Right.
your instrument,
Right.
but I was very lucky that that was offered there because my parents are sports people, and it just wouldn't have, the opportunity was what they wouldn't have understood how to provide that opportunity, you know.
Right. Right. So
So yeah, I was
this
just
is in
standing
you.
there. Yeah, and I walk up and he's like, "What instrument you want to play?" And everybody either says violin or bass because they're little kids and they don't know anything. And so he needs viola players and he needs cellists. So if you're a bass player and you don't have the biggest hand, you become a cellist. And if you want to play the violin and you have a bigger hand, then you become a violist.
Isn't that how funny how like fates are decided by the
Yeah,
size of a
yeah.
little
So
kid's
then I
hand?
became a cellist.
How
And I'm
does
very
I?
lucky because basses are gigantic and they are hard to take around.
Oh, okay, okay. So that worked out well. So I'm just wondering, is it a similar process for a kid that ends up playing the piccolo versus a flute, or a kid that ends up playing the oboe versus a saxophone? Is it a similar kind
I
of
guess
like,
so. I guess
what's
so.
what's
When you show up to band class, they need people to play the French horn, but everybody wants to play saxophone.
Yeah, yeah. Wow. So this is in you. You're growing up as a young person with this in you, and then you're showing up and you're in science, you're a scientist, and now you're in India, like on a hiatus from being a scientist, and you're now helping people meditate. And I'm wondering, in that process of creating the musical space for the meditation, are you also then, is your experience being heightened by the fact that people are in that
Yeah, of course.
mind space?
Yeah, it was an incredible experience for me. I was very, very lucky to have stumbled into that area, and the timing was very good for me to have a place in their music group there. so my best friend who, so, okay, so while I was there, they have a meditation called, they call it the Mystic Rose. Everything has sort of hippie names to it because
Fun.
it's a meditation resort.
Right,
So the
right.
first week you show up and for 3 hours, 7 days, it's 21 days total. It lasts. It's 3 hours a day every day for 21 days.
That's a
And the
long
first
time.
week, it's a long time. I was there for almost 6 months. Some people
Wow.
live there. A lot of people live there.
Wow.
Uh, so I was there for three hours a day. The first week you laugh. You're not supposed to talk. You just go in there for 3 hours and you just laugh.
3 hours, that's a lot of, like, I mean, do you bring like cough drops with you? I mean, how does one actually
No,
accomplish
you're just
that?
in there. You just laugh. I think you can have water. I can't remember. It was
Okay.
a while ago.
And
Uh,
is it just like infectiously funny, or is it
it's
all like
hard.
yeah.
It's hard to laugh for 3 hours. So it brings up a lot. A lot
Yeah.
of stuff gets brought up. So it's a bit cathartic, but a more from a place of sort of happiness, or forced happiness or whatever you want to call it. But then the second week is the crying phase, right? So then you have to cry for 3 hours a day. And
Oh my
that's really
gosh.
hard. It's easy. You can imagine there's a gender difference there
Yeah.
where women it's easier for women to cry. And you learn a lot about programming, societal
Yeah.
programming,
Yeah.
during that week. And then the third week, all this is leading up to sitting silently for 3 hours a day so that you can have a deeper sense of meditation. And it works really well because you definitely create a clearing through those 2 weeks. But for me, about 2 weeks before I started, my best friend committed suicide
I'm
that I grew
sorry.
up with. We were next door neighbors up until we graduated from high school, so we were like brothers basically. I knew that he was going through stuff, and we were emailing. Phone conversations weren't that easy back then.
Right.
My parents were really unsure how to tell me,
Hmm.
and so it slipped. The funeral happened, and then finally I just got this bad sensation right at the beginning of the crying phase that I need to talk to my parents. And so I called my dad and he told me on the phone. And, I was really lucky that I was at the beginning of this sort of crying phase. I was like in the
Yeah.
second day or something. So it really provided a space for me to grieve properly,
Yeah.
which would not have existed in my life otherwise.
It's on the list. I didn't know it was on your list, but the grieve is a peace verb, and inherent in that is what I'm hearing is that you have to allow it the space and time.
Yeah, it's really hard.
Yeah.
We don't have a society or a culture that supports that very well.
Right. Right. I mean, even just encoded into our leave policies, like, how much time one gets to be off work, for example.
Yeah, and
It's,
when there's different levels of grieving, but that was really intense. There's a lot of uh, you blame when it's somebody that close to you that does something that tragic. You blame yourself. Everybody
right.
blames themselves,
Right.
and you blame him, and you're angry. You're angry at his parents. You're angry at his other friends. You're angry at him. You're angry at, there's a lot that you have to just work through.
And so being angry
Before
is
you
also on the list of peace verbs. Allowing oneself to be angry, to move through
Yeah.
that.
It that was a big part of this guy's pop philosophy. I mean, you can watch a documentary on Netflix, and it's all sort of like there's crazy stuff that happened as a result of his uh, his him being who he is or whatever. But at the heart of what he was trying to present to people is that you have to let yourself go through the things you need to go through, and you have to be able to enjoy everything that you go through. And so, you can enjoy the grieving, you can allow yourself to grieve properly and give yourself the space for it. You can have a relationship with someone that's not sexual and just enjoy the space that you have with that person. You can enjoy flirting with somebody, and that is all it is, and it doesn't have to be any more than that, and you can just enjoy that part of it. And it's sort of like, when you start to see that we put so much thought into the outcome or what it should be that we miss like enjoying what is actually right in front of us a
And
lot of the
that
time.
just simple moment in time. The simple
Yeah,
here,
yeah,
the now.
yeah, yeah.
Wow,
So
what
yeah,
a amazing. So I think you did pretty good, right, for the midlife crisis, or you got an early start on it for one, and
I did really well. Yeah, I did
yeah,
really well. My old boss, when I ran out of money in Thailand, he emailed me and he said, I think you've probably run out of money at this point,
no
and
joke.
we've put in a bid for a proposal that we won, and we put your name on it because I figured maybe you either ran out of money and you'd wanted your old job back, or
Wow, wow.
you can, or we'd have to find somebody else. And I was like, you're right, I ran out of money. I need a job. So I went back to my old thing, and it was like the country music joke for a little while. You turn the record back, and everything comes back.
It's amazing, but just it really has a sensation that you've been held all of this time. Like the life is holding you, the universe is holding you, so to speak. To have your old boss reaching out to you and saying, "Hey, I'm thinking of you. I kind of know how much money you left with, and this should be good timing for you." It's like there's a lot of
Yeah.
love there.
So yeah,
Wow.
yeah, yeah. It was a small company. It was three people. It was basically me, him, and his wife,
Oh, that is
and we just,
super small.
yeah. And so we just did research. We had these research projects we would do for the Air Force was our biggest client. But then we had some other work for like Jet Propulsion Laboratory. And so we did a lot of work with chlorinated solvents
Hmm.
and how to deal with chlorinated solvents in the ground.
Wow. Wow. So let's see. First, I'm going to do a little time check.
Yeah.
Okay, we've got about 20 minutes left here. Um, so you met someone special in San Francisco, and
I
then the
met
two of
her
you.
actually in the Nevada desert.
I was going to ask you about that. So is this after your experience in India, and now you're coming back to
Yeah.
California? And I know what you're talking about, but I'm not sure everybody does. What happens in the Nevada desert right about right now?
Right now it's happening actually. Pandemic aside, every year there's a bunch of maniacs that go out to the Nevada desert and they build a bunch of structures, and then after a week they burn most of them down. And there's a giant man in the middle that they burn on Saturday, and they build a big temple on Sunday, and they burn that as well. And that's the Burning Man festival. And so in the San Francisco Bay Area, it's a big part of the musical culture out
Yeah.
there. So, I after coming back from India, I got involved in the more or less the electronic music scene
Mm-hmm.
in San Francisco, and so I would go out and play music at Burning Man every year, and
Wow.
we would usually play at like 5 in the morning when the sun was coming up. It was really pretty. We'd play like really chilled out music in the middle of the festival at a place called Center Camp.
That kind of seems like you got
And
the best gig in the whole thing because it's not blistering hot at 5 o'clock in the morning. And
no, and you don't have to stay up till 3 in the morning. You can sleep and get up early and go to
nice, nice, wow. And so I have some peripheral. I've never been to Burning Man, but I've been exposed to Burning Man because at age 40 I took up circus.
Okay, yes.
And so a lot of people that were teaching me, answering the phones at the circus place where I was going to were people that were just completely dedicated to the whole way of life of Burning
Yeah,
Man.
there's some circus troops that are a big part of the Burning Man culture as well that are in the Bay Area.
Yeah, yeah. And so you're out there and you're in this musical immersive like art installation. It's really about art installations too, and about intentional like creation of intentional community settings just for this short period of time of how people can interact with each other in more outside of the box ways with a lot more care and thoughtfulness. So you're in this environment and you meet this special person.
Yep, yeah, she used to live in San Francisco. She's German. Her parents are both from Indonesia, and we had mutual friends, and so she just showed up at our camp one day. She showed up with a guy named Ben, who also lives here in Singapore, and him and I play music together right now. We sort of have a little jam session once a week. So he's my main musical outlet now that I've moved to Singapore. So it's kind of funny, like the day I met her, the day I met who's someone who's probably like one of my better friends here in Singapore. And so I met her there in 2006. We, we connected there. She moved back to London. I stayed in San Francisco. We both were in relationships for 3 years. Then 3 years later, she came back to San Francisco and to Burning Man. Both of our relationships had sort of gone south at that point, and we reconnected again. And we thought, okay, this is ridiculous. We should try to figure out how to make this work.
Wow.
And we've been married for 11 years now. We
Oh,
got married in Burning
congratulations.
Man, actually. We got married with our parents. We got married 3 times. We got married because she's German and we needed some visa paperwork.
Yep.
So we got married at City Hall. That was really nice in San Francisco. And then we got married in Napa Valley. Her best friend grew up in Napa Valley.
Uh-huh.
That was one of her connections in San Francisco. So we got married at her parents' vineyard, which was really nice. And then we had our honeymoon was back at Burning Man, and we had a we had a ceremony there too. That was also really cool.
Wow, that's a lot of celebration and wonderful.
Yeah,
And so now you're now, well, not now, but a few years back, going to London, back to London together and starting a family in London. And are you at
yeah.
this point working?
We had our daughter in London. Yeah, at the Royal London Hospital.
Wow, wow, what a adventure! Yeah, you've been living quite a interesting globe
Yeah, I've been really
traversing.
lucky, from moving from a very stale suburban neighborhood outside of Washington, D.C., where the things they're famous for is the 10,000th McDonald's and a giant outlet mall to living in some really, Riverside is also, that was an amazing experience. That's 2 years living sort of in the high desert, and
Yeah,
there's so
it
much there.
they're
People
they're
make
really
fun of Riverside as a urban community, but the nature around that place is fabulous. And even the community itself that we had, I thought was really special.
It was, and talking about how the universe holds you or life holds you, I had no idea how lucky. Like at that point in my life was like a lot of kids are in their early 20s, just really confused. Just really trying to make sense of my direction, and found myself surrounded by phenomenal human beings in, like you're saying, a natural setting, which, if you take the pollution out of it, there's a lot of the LA smog that blows into
Yeah,
Riverside. And I mean, there was a
yeah,
mountain range that I didn't know existed for the first 3 months that I lived there because you couldn't see it. When you eliminate that part of it, it is incredible, the desert and just the quietude of it, and the community that we had. It was a remarkable group of people.
yeah. I mean, there's a lot of tragedy in Riverside too. There's a lot of methamphetamines, and I remember falling asleep to machine gun sounds and things like that.
Yeah,
It's certainly
yeah.
not a utopia, but it is a very special place, and yeah, I have really incredible memories from that place.
Me too. Me too. And I also picked up a husband along the way.
Ah, you did. I picked up a wife actually. We didn't. That was the source of my midlife crisis when that dissolved.
Right. And really wonderful that you had an intuitive way of understanding how to cleanse yourself and to move forward. And
I don't know. I It's hard for me to say I was intuitive about anything at that point. I was sort of pushed and prodded in certain directions by friends,
oh,
I
okay.
think.
Well,
I guess I was
friends.
intuitive enough to listen to them.
Yeah, right, right. And to have picked good friends. Yeah. Wow, Mike, this has been such an honor and a joy to hear your story. And I'm just wondering, was there more that you wanted to touch on? Like, I'm thinking, there's definitely balance. You're balancing family life, having music in your life with this job that is very demanding and also pulls you in a lot of different directions. So you're finding this balance there. And we've
I
talked
like my
about
job. I like my
it.
job. I think being a better dad is a real focus for me personally right now. I
Hmm.
feel like I struggled a lot with being a dad with our first child. I was not in the most positive place at that time. With our second child, I'm in a much better place personally.
Mm.
So I think that's really it's really helpful. And I do have a very good relationship with my daughter, but my daughter is the older one. It was just, when she was really little, I just had a real hard time dealing with the change, you
It's a
know?
huge change. I mean,
Yeah.
to go from being responsible for oneself and one's partner to having a little one that you are their everything, it's like, yeah, it's huge.
And I think the thing that is striking is that for women now, look, women get the brunt of it. Absolutely. And I'm not trying to say that at all, but your bodies are telling you and changing the whole way as that
Mm.
thing is developing inside you. Whereas
Right.
men, there's nothing. There's only the sort of mental concept that my wife is changing
Yeah, yeah, you're
or my
right.
partner is changing, and
Right.
then there's a baby and there's like, the mom has been 9 months of adaptation to be ready for this,
Yes.
and
Right. And the
men
dad
have
is
to
just
get
like
they got
0
to
to
get their
100.
shit. Yeah, you have to get your shit together, and
That's a
if you
lot.
don't prepare yourself and get your shit together, you will have to get your shit together on the other side of it because it will force you to.
And and letting go of being perfect and right, that's also on my list of peace verbs. Just
Yeah,
making mistakes, also on the list. Just
yeah,
learning, growing.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so how old are your kids now?
7 and almost 2.
7 and 2.
Yeah.
So 7, the same age that you were when you actually got the first spark that started you on your life, your
I hadn't
profession.
thought about that. Hadn't thought about that. Yeah,
It's
it's really, I mean, everybody's different,
yeah,
so we just try to put different things. Yeah, we try to throw different things at the kids to see what
expose them.
sticks.
Yeah, yeah. And so you live in a city that's surrounded with, like, there's trees on buildings, there's trees around
Yeah, Singapore is a
freeways,
very
there's
beautiful place.
yeah, and also very good for shopping. I don't know if that's a big thing for anyone in your family, but I was amazed by just how many options there are for buying something in
There's a whole shopping mall filled with record stores.
oh, good for you.
But yeah, there's a beach, we can in 30 minutes we're at the beach, we can go kayaking, uh we can go to different islands,
Wow.
so there's a lot of, it's a very modern mega urban environment, but there's a lot of, and it's very geared towards raising children as well.
Oh, wow.
So there's a lot of stuff here to support parents in raising their kids. Not financially, it's pretty much you pay for everything yourself here, but uh, it's really good for. I mean, that's why we moved here, is because it's so geared for raising children.
It's wonderful. And it seems like it's a good hub for, also, like you were mentioning, you have conversations in Australia, Indonesia. It's also fairly centrally located if you need to be in Asia, is what I'm thinking.
Yeah, it's tough. It's tough for the East Coast of the US. It's
Yes.
12 hours difference there, but every other time zone is pretty accessible.
Yeah. Wow. Wow. Well, thank you so much. What an honor. I don't want to stop if there was something else that you were like, yeah, we
I
definitely
think
need to
that
talk
pretty much,
about.
I mean, I appreciate you inviting me to this because it gives me a good chance to reflect on sort of my life, and yeah, it's really really good to sort of think about all those things that's happened that led me to this spot.
Yeah, you're welcome. And it's really, really fun to catch up with you in that way. And like, for all the youngsters out there listening, you blink and you turn 50.
Yeah,
You go from
yeah.
24 to 50 and you like turn around and say like, oh my gosh, how did that happen?
Yep, it's true. It's true. And it's easy to be distracted along the way.
And so finding those moments where you could just be right there in that particular place and time are really beautiful.
Yeah, 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 definitely.
Wow. Well, thank you so much. All the best to you, and have a great rest of your day. And I'm about
Yep.
to think about my workday tomorrow.
So where do you work these days?
Yeah. Hey, do you want me to stop the recording? Are we done with our
Yeah.
interview? Yeah, cool.
Yeah, let's finish the interview.
Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you, Mike. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem.